So up next, we have our first final discussion of today, and we will cover generative AI, separating hype from reality. What I have heard from rumors, if you add AI in your company name, you are able to raise more money. Is that true? We should find out.
So please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome on the stage Mike Reiner, General Partner of Acrobator Ventures, Robin Wauters, founder of Tech.eu, and Jivile Einikute, creator and event host of Perception Paradox.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. How is everyone feeling today? Good? I can see some low energies. It's day 2 of Tech Chill, day 2 of knowledge, fun, connections, and interesting topics. And right now we're jumping into one more interesting, very hype topic, Gen AI. So I have 2 gentlemen with me today to see, so how much is really the hype and where is that reality? Mike Reiner is here, Robin Wauters, and I guess we can start from a quick overview what's happening with the Gen AI.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for having us at TechChill. We are replacing a panel that was canceled, but I very quickly pulled up some data yesterday to put things in perspective. So I was going to spend a few minutes just showing some data and statistics to set the scene and to understand what hype actually looks like in terms of startups and VC funding. So I pulled up some deal room data. You can see that last year was already quite nuts when it comes to generative AI. This is only generative AI on a global scale. 22.5 billion almost in dollars went to generative AI last year. Safe to assume that this year is not going to be any different. Most of that money is going to companies in the United States, which might not be much of a surprise. Europe only collected $2.5 billion for GenAI funding in the last 5 years, compared to $29.5 billion going to the US, a large chunk of which is OpenAI. But even if you would not include OpenAI, you can see the US is miles ahead. If you look at it in terms of countries rather than regions, you can also see that the United States sticks out. In Europe, it's France, Germany, UK for the most part when it comes to funding. But as you can see, this is margin stuff. Most of the action is clearly in the US. There are a couple of European GenAI companies that, of course, people talk about. So they're part of this hype cycle for good reason, because a lot of them are building their own models, doing really interesting stuff. These are just a few of them with the largest funding and valuations in Europe. And the most notable one, I think, is Mistral, because they were just founded, just a year ago. And they've already raised quite a bit and double unicorn valuation at this point. So, if you look at the stage, you can also see that on the early stage, the activity is really, really not that terribly particular. But it comes to the late stage round and the mega rounds, or the monster rounds, whatever you want to call them. That's where the money is really, really flowing in GenAI. There's different types of GenAI. We'll talk about it, of course, in a little bit more detail. But there's, of course, audio, text, video. There's also robotics, there's medicine. There's a lot of stuff going on in GenAI. But very important to note, GenAI is not one thing. Like GenAI is a subcategory of AI, there are also subcategories within GenAI, and we'll get a bit deeper into that. But very clearly, most of the funding is going to the model makers, because that's the proprietary tech that you're building. If you're building your own LLMs based on the data that you also own, then it gets really interesting. And you can see that reflected in the funding. If you are in GenAI and you want to talk to investors, these are the ones you want to talk to. Most of them also based in the US, of course. But these are the most active investors in GenAI. So I just wanted to share a little bit of this data just to set the scene. And now I'll give the word back to Zivile for a conversation about it.
Thank you, Robin, for a great overview. And I guess first question goes straight to you. We were discussing already a bit about the different subcategories. You are this data guy who's overseeing the Europe. So what did you notice when it comes to the subcategories that looks the most promising right now? Maybe more on the European side.
Well, I think on the media side, I think it's the companies like Stable Diffusion and Midjourney. Everything that's visual, Photo Room in Paris, I think is doing interesting stuff. Anything that's visual, text to video, text to images, I think Europe has a little bit of an edge when it comes to that, because it's also rooted in the kind of science and talent that Europe tends to produce. But of course, competing against really, really big companies with deep pockets across the world and mostly in the US. But yeah, there are some companies that actually are building their own models, building their own data sets, LLMs, like Mistral, for example, and they're open sourcing some of it, so that makes them kind of an odd one. Aleph Alpha, same thing. So yeah, I mean, the jury's still out whether we can really compete on a global scale, but I'm confident that we will.
Okay, cool. Mike, you're here representing the venture capital side, and you do invest in the AI companies. How does AI actually disrupting your work and your business?
I think what we're seeing is more and more, let's say, thin layers, also GPT wrappers. So actually, from investor point of view, I think the risk profile has increased quite a bit. What we see a lot is sales automation, marketing automation type of stuff built on top of OpenAI or open source models. What you see a lot is also trying to make sense of internal company data. I think a lot of these startups are going to be disrupted. I mean, there's thousands of them out there, and just another GPT plugin is going to disrupt tons of them. So I think defensibility and moats are increasingly a question that we look at. The way we look at AI companies, essentially three types. So we see like core AI companies, platform AI, and vertical AI. Core AI being more research heavy, more PhDs. So DeepMind is a good example historically. I think what is one really interesting technology now, if you look at the limitations of LLMs, is it's not really understanding, right? So I think new technologies like causal AI that add more of this why question to understanding are going to be really interesting to see, to combine with LLM technology. So I think on a core AI side, these trends we'll follow very closely and love to make bets there. On a platform AI level, it's more like horizontal. So there, I mean, we've made a bunch of bets in voice, as an example. 11 Labs has been taken off crazy. We invested in Respeecher. I think what's really interesting here and how we look at it is more like selling the shovels to the gold seekers. We love to invest more in enabling tech plays. To give you an example, I mean, if you look at public markets, NVIDIA has been having a crazy ride, right? Riding the compute wave, the chips. And the other side, of course, is data. So one bet we did was data rate. They essentially enable any company to sell their data for a network of all the data marketplaces, which not only solves the training data issue, but increasingly also the legal issue. Right? We see more and more lawsuits right now. The question around, what data can you train your AI on? So this is going to be more and more important. And the last thing, like the vertical AI, is I think increasingly much more about the customer integration and being very well integrated in the workflow, and much less about technology mode in many cases, simply because technology is moving so fast that the tech you build is going to be disrupted so quickly that I think it is way, way easier to just engineer flexibility and being able to loop in and use the latest models that are out there.
But how about your own workflow? Do you use AI when you work?
So what we've done is we've built a graph, and we're mapping all the startups and also people on the graph, trying to understand causality and correlations. What that enables us to do is similarity search, so both for people and also for companies. And what it enables us to do is get a better idea of what company may be successful. But this is a really complex thing to do, so we're experimenting with it. And the reality is, what we discovered is you need shit tons of data, and in turn, this is crazy expensive, and for a fund like us, almost unsustainable. So what we've built there, I think, works to some extent, but the vision we have, we need so much more capital for it. But I actually think, and I can talk a bit more later about this, but I think there's massive opportunity in terms of using AI for deal flow sourcing. And I'm convinced that actually also we are going to be automated. I have no illusion that we can do a better job picking AI companies, or any companies for that matter, better than the AI system down the road. The question is just, is it in 5 years, is it in 10 or 20 years? But 100% AI system is going to be better at picking winners. Convinced of this. The second part, what we do right now, is just using AI tools. So as any startup does and should as well, is just using right tools to make our work easier, to automate our workflows, to save time. Automated summaries, automate like competitive research. So whenever we have a startup right away, we have essentially an auto-generated investment memo. With all the information there, it makes it easier for us to go through.
Okay, what about the media?
Well, imagine being in the media business and not using AI already. Hugely disruptive to media businesses, of course, but also quite a lot of potential. And I'm not talking about just generating articles based on AI and making it easy for journalists to write articles. It's also support, right? It's anything visual. It's transcriptions. It's the infrastructure that you use. It's how you use data and how you use data to your benefit and the way you extract insights out of data. So many changes on so many levels. But I'd be surprised to see any business not using AI already, and for that matter, individuals as well, right? And that's, I think, the most transformative thing about this GenAI. It's one of those few technologies where essentially both my mom and my kids are using it and talking to me about technology. I mean, that only comes along once every few years, this type of technology that really becomes like mainstream and gets a lot of media attention also in mainstream media. So it is super, super disruptive, and it's just on multiple layers.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, like, I've jumped on the wave a few years back, and I never looked back, I guess, because it really supports even my as individual personal workflow. I'm quite curious right now to jump and dive more into this hype and reality, because I don't know if you've noticed many startup slogans, pitch competitions everywhere, AI, 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 I do with AI. How you, for example, as an investor, Mike, separate where is the hype, where is actually the actual technology, or how do you?
I mean, this is not a first hype, right? Back, I think it was 2014, we saw the same thing, that increasingly most of the decks we got had AI in it, which most of it was bullshit. There was very little to non-AI, but there was this hype cycle as well, and a massive disappointment after. What we see now is different in the way that like the capacity to go horizontal, and what OpenAI in particular has done is incredible. So this hype cycle, I think, is very different in terms of it's really going to be fundamentally disruptive for any industry. I think the problem from investor side and where it comes to the hype is, again, what I said earlier, is the moats and defensibility is so low. And essentially it's just for a startup, okay, let's just use what's out there and build something very thin on top of it and call it like, the next big AI thing. And it's increasingly hard to predict like who's going to be a winner, who's not. I think there's going to be a lot of disappointment as well because expectations are so high. And that's a problem with the hype cycle always. Expectations are massive and then things need a bit more time. So I think what we're going to see now is incredible work and resource efficiency. When you look at companies of the future, I mean, Sam Altman mentioned this as a quote, the next billion-dollar company may be a company with 3 employees, right? So as AI tools are getting so powerful, you will have less and less people in your company to get the work done. I think that is definitely going to be the case, I mean, regards of 3 employees, but any department is going to work way more efficient with AI support. So that's a massive one. I also think there's going to be fundamental disruption of business models. And I mean, for instance, if you take SaaS, I think it's a great example. I think it's going to be disrupted quite significantly. And the reason I think so is for 2 reasons. One, increasingly, you will see the shift towards performance-based. Instead of, if you have a recurring business model, it's been incredible opportunity for startups because the money keeps on coming in, every month. But increasingly, customers are going to demand to pay based on performance, right? So the recurring revenue model, I think, is going to get less and less. So I think that's one thing we're going to see. And on top of it, as GenAI is going to get more powerful, what we're going to see is companies, and any company, just being able to create their own programs, highly customized and personalized. So this is still going to take years, but eventually companies can just say, okay, I need this type of CRM, I have this kind of people, and it will just generate their own tools, programs with interfaces highly personalized for the specific sales, whoever employee. And you need less and less of software out there in the market. Hence, it's going to be more generated by the companies and less bought in as a supplier. So these trends are all going to be significant.
Do you see, Robin, any trends for the media industry? How it's going to look like?
Well, I want to come back to your question about how much of it is hype. As Mike pointed out, if you have an AI hype cycle, of course, a lot of companies are going to call themselves AI, even if they're not. They're relatively easy to dig a little bit beneath the surface and see, who's really building their own models, who's using their own data sets, and who's really sort of building layers on top. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you can pick winners as an investor just based on that, because some of the biggest companies will probably be the ones building on other people's infrastructure, right, and chips and whatnot. So very, very difficult to sort of separate hype from reality sometimes, also from a journalist perspective. But I would also like to point out that hype is not necessarily a bad thing, right? The fact that the hype leads to more attention and more innovation and more funding going to it might also lead to more real breakthrough technologies, on a deep tech level, on infrastructure, in medicine, in agriculture, and whatnot. So I don't think hype is necessarily a bad thing. I don't know if you agree with that, but
Yeah, but I mean, I think also when we talk about hype right now, I think the technology shift is so fundamental that regardless of a hype around it, it's going to be incredibly transformative, right? And the hype, to your point, and just the excitement that even of your grandmother, that means there's going to be such crazy adoption. So I don't see the disappointment level that we saw 7 years ago around AI. I'm not going to see this now, I think. So I think we're going to see certain types of disappointment that are more horizontal. But otherwise, when it comes to vertical implications, I think I actually don't think it's really a hype, to be honest. I think it is really a fundamental shift.
And observing that this whole GenAI, then what kind of risk do you see that potentially can appear out of that? Because it's not only like the hype and the technology innovation, there are some risks coming into.
Risk? Well, look, there's a lot of conversation, of course, around the alignment issue and the risk of AI for humanity. But I think that's such a complex topic, and I don't think, but that's just my personal point, I think it is extremely hard to regulate this on a software level. I actually don't see how. So the only way I could think of, if you're really worried about longer-term implications of general artificial intelligence and taking over, I think the only way to potentially regulate this is with compute itself, right? Almost like the way you have a weapons license, you need to regulate compute and access to certain parties. But I think this is way further ahead. I worry less about the general artificial intelligence right now, and much more about harmful niche applications and what you see in cybersecurity and AI-enabled attacks and how they can wreak havoc. And I think we're going to see much more in the next 5 to 10 years. And that's what I worry about way more, about critical infrastructure being disrupted and what that may cause, in society in the near term.
Yeah, I mean, those are the risks, like cybercrime, deepfakes, the whole debate about copyright in art and whatnot. Those are the risks that are real today. And then the other one, long-term picture risks with AI that I'm sure we'll have many, many more conversations about on stage and off. But yeah, I mean, GenAI already is causing a lot of problems today, right? In e-commerce, in cybersecurity, in spam, deepfakes. It's there.
So how is your investment landscape changing right now with technology moving that fast? Is there kind of long-term implications, or how does it look?
Long-term? Yes, I think maybe slightly controversial. I think longer term, ironically, from investor point of view, relationships are going to be more important.
Relationships.
Yeah, because I think longer term, the funds that are going to do the best are the funds that have the best AI. Partly that is going to be also done by suppliers. They're going to offer powerful AI systems to venture capitalists. So then the question is around differentiation. And then it's going to be funds that have a lot of capital. They're going to build their own AI systems. So I think the best investments increasingly are going to be picked by AI systems and support as well. So then value add of an investor is very important, but increasingly also just the relationship of the people. And just to give you one example there, also in the next fund already, we decided we want to offer coaching to every single founder. And not just business coaching, but more holistic coaching as well. I think one problem you see with founders is like the way they work oftentimes is not sustainable. So it's like sprinting until they fall. So also to work with the coaching to help founders to work in a more sustainable way, to pay more attention to their body actually and not be all the time here and run nonstop, I think is also going to be very important. So what we're going to double down on next to AI is also double down on the people, the relationship, being more there with founders, helping founders to pick the right AI tools, which to the earlier point is going to be increasingly important to be resource efficient and fast to execute.
I like this trend where it's going. Do you have anything to add, Robin?
Yeah, it's funny because I started Tech.eu as a small online media business about 11 years ago, when these tools were not available yet, or at least not mainstream. If I would start that business today, it would look completely different and would go about it very, very differently. When you're in the business, making that shift looks different than starting from scratch. So I don't even know if I would start the same business if I would start it today. And that's interesting to think about because it sort of opens up your mind about what else could I do or should I do with these tools that are now available. And they're advancing at such a rapid clip that it's almost, next year is going to be, we're going to have different conversations about GenAI, sure.
And maybe also one advice to founders, I mean, next to just using the latest tools that are out there, would really be to closely look at what the big guys are doing, Google, OpenAI, etc., and don't build something that is going to be likely disrupt in a year, half a year even. Because what we're going to increasingly see is companies even growing to whatever 20 million ARR going to be disrupted and going back to zero. So if you're building a startup that very likely plugin is going to be launched in 2 months' time, then why waste your time trying to make better sense of company data? That's going to be solved. So to really pick sustainable business cases and look more for the customer integrations to create moat, and on data side, so do more scenario planning would be my advice.
I'll say one last thing about GenAI now that we have a stage. I don't know what it's like for you in the audience, but if you work in tech in a relatively long period, like I have been for the last 20 years as a journalist, it's a privileged position. You get a front row seat to sort of the future of humanity and society through technology. But you also get to a point where you get sort of, you're always saturated with new technology, you get kind of used to it and you get cynical about it. GenAI is one of those things that, if you watch the demo videos from Sora, for example, OpenAI text-to-video generator, it's genuinely exciting. It feels like something cool and something novel and something that just opens up a new world of creativity. And I think it's just a really, really exciting time.
Indeed, exciting times ahead with GenAI. Gentlemen, it was Mike, it was Robin. Thank you for joining me today here and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks.